Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, folks. How you doing today? We are back with Dana from Hen Lane for episode number 2. And if you saw our first episode, we are flipping the script. I'm going to be the interviewee, and she is going to be the interviewer. So how you doing, Dana? The floor is yours.
All right, great. Well, I'm excited for the topic and question that I have for you today, especially with your course being one rental at a time, because there's a question of, well, how big should this rental be?
Yeah.
Should it be a single family home or should it be multifamily? So my question here is, what is the difference between, I assume, but correct me if I'm wrong, that you promote buying one single family home and getting your kind of feet wet before you dive into the deep end. But what is the biggest difference in management between a single family and then moving over to multifamily?
Yeah, so there is a surprisingly large difference. And again, as I've admitted many times, my first commercial or apartment building was a 5-unit building. And all I'd owned is rental houses. I think we had technically had a duplex, but trust me, they were 2 houses just on a big lot. So they acted like houses, right? They had their own backyard, their own parking. They probably never saw each other the way the configuration was. So really it was 8 houses. And then we sell one, actually our first property, as we talk about in our book, and we go to this 5-unit. And as the story is spun in the book, our cash flow explodes, which it does, right? A house that's running up in value, it's going to be negative cash flow. We buy this multifamily where the rents are triple and the price is less. And it's like, hey, we win, right? But what really happened for that first 12 months is I was introduced to multifamily property management, and it is very different. My whole plan for the expense structure was wrong. My whole plan for tenant headaches was wrong. My tenant turnover was wrong, right? So what I would tell somebody who's thinking about, single families or multifamily is, for most of us, we need to start with a single family. But also if you have single family experience and you're ready to go multi, but let's be clear by multi, right? 3, 4, 5 houses on one lot that act like houses, not those. I'm talking connected walls, right? Like I bought a 5-plex. It was a big rectangle, like little one. I think there were 600 square foot 1-bedrooms, right? So just bing, 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 bing. And that's very different. So first off, the expense structure is different. You pay water, you have to pay lawn care, lots more repair requests. And again, you have tenant headaches. They play their music too loud. Their surround sound does this. Their dogs do that. They parked in my spot. Rent collection is proved to be more difficult. And then turnover is much higher in apartments like that, especially in an environment like we just went through, right? Houses are screaming, but multis are a little slow. So what I did when I bought that 5-unit is I took all my experience from houses and I assumed that 5-unit would be the same. And I had a rough first year because expenses were higher. Repair requests were much, much higher. A lot more tracking. And thankfully I had a property manager because I probably could have managed single family homes if it was closer, but there's no chance. Even if that 5-plex was like 3 blocks away, I could not have managed it given my day job. It was too much. It's amazing. Like it was 5 people in a little square footage, but I think like interactions and headaches went up like 20-fold. Like I have houses in the beginning where they never called me, right? I had several 2 or 3 houses of the 8 that they went in, they were perfect. Never had any problems. Those are easy to manage. Let me tell you, Dana, when you never hear from your tenant, except when rent comes in, you think that's how it's supposed to be. And that doesn't happen, at least in my experience in multifamily. Every apartment building I've owned, and I've owned several, a lot more repair requests, a lot more difficulty collecting rent compared to houses. Turnover is much, much higher. It's just a different ballgame. If you're in California and you're going to rent somewhere, you're going to try to self-manage somewhere else, definitely get a house. I would not try to do like a 10 or 20 unit building, hours away. Especially if you have a job, that would probably not end well. So yeah, vastly different experience.
Yeah. Talk about the turnover. Like what's the average turnover you see in your 5-plex versus your single family home? Like every 2 years, every 1 year, talk about that a bit more.
Yeah. So I did this math. I think it's about a year old, but it's probably still accurate. My average turnover in a house, right? Dedicated single family home is over 8 years. They just don't move.
Wow.
Right? And my multis is just, I think it was 27 months. So just over 2 years.
Okay.
So vastly different, right? And again, if you have 5 units and your turnover is every 27 months, you're having a turnover about every 6 months, right? That's just kind of how the math works. So
Yeah.
yeah, vastly. Now, of course, let's be clear. An average house turnover is like 6 or 7 grand, and an average apartment turnover is more like 2 grand. So there is that delta, but still a lot more frequent.
Yeah. And then talk about, so you spoke about utilities also, and obviously like trash is something that you would just incur yourself.
Mhm.
But what about submetering? Everyone asks about that. And hey, they kind of think they buy a place and it automatically qualifies for submetering. What was your experience with that in utilities and also utility usage, right?
Yeah.
Because people always ask me questions of like, okay, well, is it just per square footage of the property? It's like, well, usually it's based on number of occupants. Like each property has an amount, but then it's also occupants. Because if you have two properties that are the same size, but one has two people and
Mhm.
one has one, obviously the one with two is going to use more utilities than the one with one, you assume. So talk about submetering. And then if you can't do submetering, kind of how you think about that.
Yeah. So I've tried this a lot during my career. I used to buy two houses on one lot where the one house was a converted garage and they only had a single meter and those kinds of things. I've tried square footage. I've tried occupancy. I've tried hey, you guys pay 80%, I'll pay 20. And you always have to do it, on a like 1 month in arrears, right?
Mhm.
And it is such a hassle that I will not buy those anymore. And
Yeah.
and the ones I have in my portfolio, which I have several, I no longer rent to two families. I rent them to one family, one lease, and let
Yeah.
them take care of it. I've looked at submetering. I looked at adding panels. At least at the time I did, it was very expensive. And it's like, well, this is going to take 12 years to pay back or whatever it was. So I never went that way. I have found it easier to rent to big families is my answer to this. And I actually get more rent. My multi-generational living, single lease, two spaces,
Oh, yeah.
you can actually get more. So that's been my answer to submetering. Don't do it. Don't split it up. Just find a grandma, a mom, and their kids. Maybe there's a husband in there somewhere. I don't know. But yeah, that's been my answer. It's multi-generational living, and or sisters or brothers or whatever. But one lease for both units. That's been my answer because it was just too hard, too much of a headache.
Yeah. And then talk about also communal areas, right? Because if you think about communal areas with like, I always think of like landscaping in a lease for a single family, you just put in there, you're responsible for the landscaping and it's in the same condition as upon move in. We
Mhm.
expect it to be the same. But talk about that with multifamily, because obviously the backyard, you can't
Yeah.
separate it and say you're responsible for this parcel and you're responsible for this. You just can't do it. So
Yeah.
talk more about the communal areas and how you think about managing that, the cleaning, the landscaping, all of that, the changing of the light bulbs because
Yeah.
it's not in the unit type
Yeah.
thing.
Yeah, there's just so much more you're responsible for as a landlord. And again, these are things you learn when you just don't know. That's all on me. Right. Well, we do weekly. I think it's biweekly landscaping. Right. Every 2 weeks they go out. We do 30-day walkthroughs of all the communal areas. Again, when I say we, I mean property manager. It's just stuff we have to schedule.
Yeah.
And
Yep.
then of course we get a call that we'll fix it. But generally it's just every 30 days they walk through. I think it's on I think it's scheduled on the 20th. They just walk through all the outside areas and go, oh, light bulb number 4 is gone, or whatever.
Yeah.
So it's process, procedure, and expenses. So again, running a bigger is better is a great mindset when you just think about the unit count and income. But man, the headache and hassle factor, especially if you're a W-2 employee, self-managing, oh, I would much rather do houses.
Yeah. And then also talk about with the so in California at least, and you're obviously a California investor, over 16 units, you need an on-site manager. Have you had experience with that? Thoughts and
Absolutely.
comments?
Yeah, I've bought 3 properties over that number, two 18s and a 20, 3 18s, might have been 3 18s, so 4, I guess. And yeah, you got to give an on-site manager, which they get 1 unit for free. They're an employee, right? So they have whatever that is, right? I get payroll stubs or payroll taxes, and it's a hassle. Don't ever buy 16 units, right? Because you're basically giving a unit away for free. I actually think 18 is probably one of the worst numbers to buy because it's really like you're buying 17. But yeah, it's California law. You got to have an on-site manager.
Yeah. And do you have to give it away for free, or can you give rent reduction?
You can do whatever you want. That's just it's a
Okay.
standard in Fresno. I mean, it's all negotiable.
Yeah.
Again, the units we have are there's again, like we talked about earlier, lots of stuff goes on, and the on-site manager does the walkthroughs and all that. They all earn their free rent for sure.
Yeah. Yeah. It's interesting. I have a friend who was a on-site manager and had mentioned that she did most of the work. She said, I was living in the place and I got a rent cut. But I was doing most of the work. I was doing all the walkthroughs. The management company they were just collecting rent online. I was doing most of the stuff. And so yeah, it's interesting that I think the biggest thing is finding a good on-site manager. It's like hiring employees too. You have to interview a lot of people.
Yeah. Very cool. Well, this has been fun. I love this exercise. And again, folks, if you don't know, Dana's created has a 30-day trial. Himlane does, but Dana went ahead and created a script for you to test it, put it through its paces. There's a free version of the PDF in my free course, and actual 6 videos of Dana walking through the script in the paid course, how to get started one rental at a time. Thank you very much, Dana.
Great. Thanks for having me.